welcome to this week's edition of Done and Dusted. You're joining Australia's leading family law barrister, Darren Mort, and myself, Caroline Counsel. I'm an accredited family law specialist. Tonight, we're actually going to focus on a family post-separation that has written to us asking for a bit of help. So tonight, Darren, you and I are going to solve the problems relating to Jeff. And Jeff writes, "Dear Done and Dusted, my wife and I separated and we've got 3 kids under 11 and we've got 2 at primary school, Tim aged 10, Michaela aged 8, and 1 preschooler, Primrose, aged 2. Don't you love that name?
Love it.
I might add the names are in fact made up to protect the identities of this family. But
can I just ask, did you make up that name, Primrose?
I did make up the name Primrose, but I think it's a pretty name, and I think there should be more children out there called Primrose.
I think I'm going to call my daughter Hydrangea.
Of course, there's always Rose. Anyway, poor old Jeff writes, life has been pretty hectic before we were separated, no joke, with kids doing a whole lot of activities, often after school hours, but also at school. Sometimes their sports mean we have to travel in different directions. This is not uncommon. Tim is really into soccer and Michaela into her dancing and swimming. Sometimes Tim's soccer competition means on a Thursday night there is training at school, but Saturday we can be anywhere. I also coach Tim's team, so I have to be there. Michaela goes to swimming Tuesday, dance classes on Thursday, and sometimes she performs on weekends, but that's infrequent. And before we separated, Di and I used to share the load, but with time and the kids being divided between us, it gets a bit frantic for me working full-time as well. I don't think she wants to admit it, but it has to be the same for Di. She tells me I have to get myself organised, and that doesn't get around the fact I'm supposed to be in 2 places at once. Is there something I'm missing? I feel like I need 2 of me. Jeff, not uncommon, is it?
No, he's obviously not a Gemini like us two, and we can handle 2 lights at once.
Going separate directions at the one time, or that frequent device that we think all families should have, and that's a time machine to go back and do what you need to do. So,
well, did you have to pick this letter out of the barrel this week? Because I'm having post-traumatic stress, because when our kids were 3, we had 3 of them doing sports on Saturdays and every other night. Honestly, you'd be in the car from 9 till 5, and my wife would be in another car doing the same, and we'd be passing each other on the road, on the netball, football, ballet, singing, you name it. And picking up speeding tickets on the way, and it's horrific. So I can relate to Jeff, and no doubt Di. I can absolutely relate to that story.
Yeah, and I think it's harder also, like when you're pulling the cart in the one direction when you are pre-separation, you're absolutely gunning for the kids. So all your focus is on making sure that the kids get to where they're supposed to be. I remember my parents turning up Sandringham after an athletics competition, and I was meant to perform even though the results were in, and I just said, yeah, nah. So I feel sorry. I feel sorry for parents who are happily united trying to get through this sort of workload.
Yeah.
But you add to that the complication, and I think what Jeff might be feeling, and you might be able to reflect on this a bit, Darren, I think he's feeling like he's being pulled in half. He's asking for a bit of help from Di, but she's either disinterested or really separated. I'm not sure about the dynamic between them, but it's often the case that one parent has to play catch up, or one parent has to try and juggle more, or finds the juggle harder. But there doesn't seem to be a lot of help coming from Di's direction. What do you think, Darren?
I don't know. Maybe it's just his perception. Maybe he needs to get onto Airtasker. But no, seriously, maybe it's his perception. Look, it is exhausting. absolutely exhausting. I remember trying to get little naps in between even. But what I find too in these cases is that often parents, I know it's a terrible thing to say, but I'm guilty of it. Often parents enjoy one activity more than another to go
Yeah.
to. For example, I wasn't really a big fan of going to my daughter's ballet, but I didn't mind going to my other daughter's netball. And if they were having a bit of a singing lesson, I didn't mind that as well. But if they were doing something else that didn't really, give me too many thrills, and maybe it's this thing that which is a constant theme in family law cases. Maybe it's just opening up some communication channels and just seeing A, whether Di is experiencing the same thing, and B, whether she'd particularly like to take, I don't know, maybe Michaela to ballet or whatever. She's going dancing and swimming.
Swimming, yeah.
Maybe she might like to share the load, because she'd have to feel the same.
Because it's pretty hard to say yes, blink first. It's that whole, they're navigating a post-separation relationship where they don't, they're no longer best buds.
No.
There might have been some acrimony. It doesn't even matter. It doesn't even matter if you're highly cooperative. It's really hard. One of the hardest things you can ask for on the planet is help from someone else. And I think it might be a case of Di not wanting to blink first, but I agree. I think if Jeff and Di could find a way to clear the air, and I'm just curious about us both putting on our family dispute resolution practitioner hats for a moment. Because I'm always tempted when I'm dealing with families to say, okay, let's start with the kids and let's start with a given week or a fortnight and let's look at their activities and let's look at what that is going to look like for this family, even post-separation. And I think you've also hit the nail on the head, Darren, when you talked about preferences, because Jeff clearly has a preference around the soccer game. So he's heavily into training and watching Tim kick the soccer ball around. So I'm wondering if there isn't a bit of a potential solution for this family if they were to reinvent who's got the kids on what times, because it sounds like it's equal time, and I'm wondering if that's week about.
Yeah, he doesn't give us much information, does he? Because if it was a week about, that might work better with blocks. But you see, the problem is with Tim playing soccer, it's sort of Michaela's got a stationary fest in terms of her dancing and singing, because I assume that they're at the same location. And you've got this soccer, which is like basketball. The parents can relate to basketball. It's a nightmare. And you're taking kids, and it depends what league they're in, from here to Geelong sometimes to basketball. So it's a nightmare. So he might have these incredible distances to travel and then think, how the hell am I going to get back? What I'd do if I was Jeff, I'd say, depending on what his communication's like with Di, I'd open up that conversation and I'd say, listen, Grandma and Grandpa have offered to take Michaela to dancing. Grandma loves dancing. She may be a possibility. Or Uncle Tom might like to take Michaela to swimming while I'm running around the traps with the oldest, Tim, in terms of his soccer. So he might say, look, if you can't do it, that's what I'm going to have to do every Saturday when Michaela's got swimming lessons. Grandma's going to take her. Now, I'm happy for you to take her, but how do you feel about that? Because again, we don't know from this letter whether Di's getting help, but that his perception might be right, that she doesn't seem to be complaining about it because she's actually got help and she doesn't tell him.
She might be highly organised and she might think, well, gee whiz, it was always me during the marriage. And,
I know.
And it's always me post-separation.
She's got a little Primrose, and with a name like that, she's likely to be wanting to go to one of those, dance, singing, acting schools,
And dress up as a unicorn.
Dress up as a unicorn, exactly.
Yeah. So look, this is, I think, where families get let down by that whole idea of you have to religiously stick, though, to the 7 days with dad and the 7 days with mum, rather than getting a little creative around problem solving.
Yeah.
And again, that calling on others for help. It's a really good idea, particularly if they are available and make themselves available.
Yep.
And even in pre-separated families, we see it all the time at, the netball, the basketball. The grandparents like to turn up if they're nearby and available. And
yep.
It's sometimes harder to say, look, you've got to put this regularly on your dance card. You've got to be available every Saturday to take care of Michaela. I think that's when it starts to get slightly tricky, but Jeff could build up a bit of an army of supporters, if that makes sense. But I bet they didn't have one parent doing all of this pre-separation. I bet one parent wasn't dashing to ballet and then dashing back to soccer and then dashing here, there, and everywhere. They must have separated the load, and as you say, cars passing on the highway to the various activities.
The other thing too, in separated households, we always come across this where whether you're acting for a father or a mother, one parent, whether there's a little bit of a tinge of revenge or, tries to load the other parent up with their extracurricular activities during their time. Yeah. If you come across that, you would have lots of time.
Yeah. And the irony was that we had a client who was doing that where there was absolutely no available time whatsoever. And I was very concerned that it looked deliberate. I was very concerned that it looked like a complete manipulation. Well, Stone the Crow's dad, this kid ended up being offered some wham bam role in Hollywood as a result of all these extracurricular activities. And I thought, oh, well, she was right. I was wrong. So they hit pay dirt when little Tommy, or whatever his name was, went off and scored an acting role, and not insignificant. So he was considered to be a bit of an all-round talent, and so he's off and running. He's that was some time ago. So there's a bit of a career happening there, and of course you and I both know the percentage of kids that play the violin, but they're never going to stand on a stage and receive the accolade. So when somebody works assiduously to fill every waking moment in a child's life, it can also, apart from squeezing the other parent out, the other parent could end up being quite concerned that this is a helicopter hothouse parent that you're watching, and this kid never has time really to be a kid. And I'm reflecting particularly on the only child phenomenon, where literally they're put under the microscope by one parent and they can't move because that parent's got them completely blocked out in terms of time. So I think you've hit the nail on the head. If it's taking up so much time and one parent says, but that's something I do and you can't do it as well as I do, or the child's asked me to be there, then there's something a little more sinister than I think is happening in Jeff and Di's case.
Yeah, I think so too. I think, my greatest disappointment was that my second daughter didn't become a musical theatre star. I tried to be that helicopter parent. I tried to be that theatre dad, but it just didn't work out. I was so disappointed. We spent all the money. She had all the potential, and she just blew it in our faces.
So, you mean your daughter's got a mind of her own, and she's actually still graduated and she's got on with life?
How terrible. And the other thing to consider, which is kind of funny what I'm saying, but I don't, absolutely mean it. Of course I do. But my son used to play basketball, and he was, I hope he doesn't listen to this, he was terrible. He was so bad, one of the fathers used to say to me, "What does he bother?" Right? He was just terrible. But you know what? He loved it because his close circle of mates were all playing.
Yeah.
And he went because his mates were there. As soon as he got the ball in his hand, he'd throw it to his mates. But he loved it because of that. He was good at other sports, but he loved basketball because it was with his mates every Saturday. And they weren't from the school group of friends. So I think parents have got to be conscious of that too. They might say, little Michaela, she's not a very good swimmer, I don't know why she bothers, but at the end of the day, she might like doing that because she's with her mates, Yeah,
exactly. And this family's lucky in a lot of ways because they seem spoiled for choice. So there's a lot of families out there doing it really tough at the moment, and they're going to do it tougher. And sometimes the first thing to fall by the wayside is that extracurricular activity. If it's got a price tag attached to it, that'll often be something that a kid is basically told, look, we can't afford the fees for the next term. So I think Jeff and Di really need to focus on some of the positives here. Just going back to one of your earlier comments that you made about clearing the air, how do you think Jeff and Di might be able to go about clearing the air? I'm not 100% sure I understand their interpersonal dynamic and how good they are at communicating. Communication could be an issue, but how do you think they might be able to go about clearing the air and perhaps shaking down a fortnightly agenda for the kids to make it work a bit smoother?
Well, number one, I'd be avoiding court at all costs because that's not going to help them with this issue. If I was Jeff, I would register at a relationship centre and get them to contact Di. I'm just making an assumption here that he just can't ring her up. If it's a situation where you just can't ring her up and tell her about it, as a fallback, I'd use a relationship centre. And just to give, I mean, look, Di mightn't be having these issues, just to have a perception that he may need a hand, and some, I don't know, I'm generalising here, but some blokes find it hard to say, look, I do need some assistance. And Jeff might be one of those blokes who's just a little bit scared of reaching out, and Di might be all too, open to the suggestion of helping him out if she can, So he doesn't say anything really sinister about Di in this letter.
No, I don't get the impression that they're at loggerheads. It's sometimes a failing on the part of one parent to realise that the other parent does need a bit of help, or might need some organisational skills, or might need the same support tools that they've got available to them.
Can I say this too, just in relation to support tools, parents in these various groups, particularly soccer, I assume, more so, dancing probably, not so much swimming, you also develop a really strong sense of community in those sports. So can I suggest to Jeff too, again, if Di is not open to it, because she should be involved in this process, he may choose to ask Fred whether, little Jimmy, whether they could give a lift to Tim to soccer in Bacchus Marsh or something on the day because he can't make it. Something like that, which wouldn't put Tim's nose out of joint because he'd be happy because he's with his mate. I probably may do that too. There's always, I suppose Jeff might be cognizant of the fact that when they were a couple under the same roof, that they might have relied on other parents for school drop-offs and pickups and things like that.
Which happens, and that's perfectly normal. It's
that's right.
If Tim and Jeff doesn't say if he has to be there every Saturday. Clearly, training for him as the coach, and they often have more than one coach. They often have they have a group of coaches so that they cover for each other. So he might say, "Look, I'm going to focus on Tim on Thursday. Somebody in my support group can take Michaela to swimming, and then come Saturday, I might alternate. I might go with Tim to his soccer game on Saturday one week, and then go with Michaela to dance the next week." The other option, of course, is Tim is a constant with Jeff and the training and the soccer, so that even though Tim's meant to be with mum week about, I presume, even though it doesn't say it, that means there could be some one-on-one time with Tim and Dad. So, the boys together, if you will. So that too, but that's really something where a boat has to get pushed out and the conversation has to happen, because the goalposts will be moved by Dad on mum, and mum might actually resent him trying to change everything up, if that makes sense. So
there's lots of things we don't know about in this, but there's a couple of, hopefully we've given us a couple of hints to Jeff what he might like to pursue or think about, because I don't think he's thought about those things in this letter.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, yeah.
so,
But counseling's a good idea but I also don't think he should just let the family relationship. And I know this isn't what you were suggesting. I don't think he should just let the family relationship centre out of the blue phone die.
no,
He
no,
really should say, look, and again, how I usually couch it with my clients, I don't know about you, but I'll often say, look, Di could really do with your help.
yep,
So I've got some ideas I wouldn't mind sort of bouncing with you.
yep,
And I thought we could be helped if we had somebody that does this sort of stuff all the time, which is
yep,
what family dispute resolution practitioners do. They
yep,
help families sort out problems.
yep.
And this seems to be a scheduling problem. It doesn't seem to
Yeah,
be
it does, doesn't it?
emotional or nasty or vindictive or malicious.
Ah,
No, so it's really around how do we make this family in a post-separation space work a bit smoother so
yep.
that the kids don't fall through the gaps in terms of their activities.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. Yeah, and look, the other thing too is that, have you noticed in this letter he doesn't say anything untoward about the children in terms of their behaviours or
No,
anything like that. It's
no.
pretty. I reckon you're on the money in terms of it just being a scheduling issue. Um, you
But
know,
often there can be you can even if you think it's oh look it's just scheduling. If you go about problem solving the wrong way, you no longer have that sort of immediacy of being able to read your former partner. So when a couple lives together, they can work out whether something's going to go up the flagpole or not, and
hopefully,
they can take a read of their partner and think, okay, that approach isn't going to work, and so they make those adjustments. A lot harder when you no longer have the immediacy of being able to read your former partner. So the family relationship centre or relationships Australia or any of those service and providers or mediators,
yep,
family dispute resolution practitioners really will help unblock what I consider to be a blocked communication, which can become exacerbated. And all you need to do is throw something new into the mix, and a blocked channel of communication can then be blown out of all proportion. For example, if Jeff or Di were to repartner,
yep,
and if Di's new partner happens to be a retired soccer player, and then suddenly he's turning up at soccer practice and he's keen to get involved. So you have to prepare good, solid foundations of communication for when the hard times really do roll in, and they invariably will. There'll be invariably some stumbling block along the way. But if they've learned some of those skills and if they've learned the benefit of reaching out to a family dispute resolution practitioner or service, they'll know that that works, and they'll also be able to demonstrate to each other that they've been able to work cooperatively as separated parents.
Mm. The other thing too, and we don't know a lot of things in this, but the other thing too is Jeff's the coach, isn't he? Is he?
Yeah, he's the coach.
And so, from Michaela's perception, because she's only 8, if Dad's spending a lot of time with Tim at soccer, and he's given some priority in terms of Dad's involvement with the team, Dad just wants to be just keep it as a bit of a flag in relation to how Michaela's feeling about all this as well,
Mm.
because she's handballed off to swimming and dancing every week, and Dad's not there, or he's not available to dance concerts or things like that. I just noticed from personal experience too. Just gotta just carefully weigh up the times. Not that it has to be equal time, but just check in with the kids now and then to see how they're getting along, how they're feeling. If they pick up any vibes that one or either of them are feeling a bit, of favoritism, and that can go both ways with mum and dad. I think just as a parent, just check in with that. because it's important. Yeah.
Absolutely. You don't want a kid to think I'm unloved and
That's right.
one parent doesn't love me. And it may just be the sheer pressure of time and one parent not being able to be in two places. But I also like that whole idea of alternating. I like that, if Tim can get out of, or if Jeff, sorry, I'm confusing father and son. If Jeff can get out of seeing every game, so if he's there for every training, fine. But if he can get out of being there for every game, that's when he might be able to look at Michaela. Because of course, you don't necessarily have the luxury of a perfect timetable on a Saturday of kids' activities.
No, you don't. The other thing I was going to say too is this, that we know through our work with family consultants and the courts that children love rituals and they love making memories. And we all know, as soon as I say, give us one of your best childhood memories, you'll go probably straight to a holiday that you had a family holiday together with your siblings, right? And I think when I used to be, running down the roads, and my wife did too, we'd eventually meet in a spot at 1 o'clock, if we could. It might be a bit hard with Tim, but meet at a spot at a shop where the kids had a milkshake. And I think in a separated household, in a case like this, if Di is helping out Jeff, she could just drop off the kids at some spot where the kids see that both mum and dad there's a level of cooperation between them, but they're also making a memory by having that as a ritual on a Saturday.
Yeah.
So, I know my kids, for example, say, "Oh, Dad used to drag us here and drag us there." But one of the highlights was we'd all have a chocolate milkshake at Fred Young's on Saturday.
Yeah,
So
you remember the fun bit.
Yes, I needed more than a chocolate milkshake. I needed a scotch on the rocks or something. But leaving that aside, it's you can turn these things into such positive experiences by looking at the glass half full rather than half empty, and in doing so, you're just getting gold medals. Being a parent to these kids, because the kids are just lapping it up. They just love it, and they reflect back on it in years to come. So,
and you've just talked about your experience in a united family. Imagine the power and the message that two separated parents could give their kids if they too could meet at 1 p.m. on a Saturday for a milkshake with the kids.
Absolutely.
It's not for everyone. But for highly cooperative parents who have been able to prioritize the needs of their kids above their own emotions, it could be a very powerful thing that the kids just say, yeah, mum and dad separated, but you know what? We don't really remember it. We've just always been used to having mum and dad in our lives.
Absolutely. So, on that sweet note of milkshakes, I'm going to ask you, because my little computer here says I've got control now, which is not let alone in control. I'm going to ask you a little takeaway from this D&D for tonight.
Yeah, the big takeaway is the communication piece. Focus on the kids, and it might be tough having a conversation, but I think it's going to get a lot tougher if you don't have that conversation. So put your pride to one side and phone and get the help that you need, and never be afraid to say, I need your help. As I said, it's one of the most powerful things you can ask for on the planet, help from someone else.
Well, I'd say that my takeaway is, as a parent, be inventive and have fun. Parenting is tough. It's really tough. And there's no manual to be how to be a good parent. And each child requires a different manual if there were one. But I say be inventive. Think about ways that it could be fun, and the challenge is to make good memories for your kids, because they'll remember them fondly as they grow up and you get older and forget them.
And that's what you're in the business of doing. You're in the business of making memories for your children.